480 BCE marked a pivotal moment in Greek history. Across the Aegean and Anatolia, the Persian Empire had grown into an unstoppable force under King Xerxes I, son of Darius. From the Ionian coast to the mountains of Thrace, Persian satraps extended their authority, leaving the Greek city-states of the mainland wary and divided. While some cities, such as Thebes and Thessaly, considered submission, others, most notably Sparta and Athens, resolved to resist. Xerxes' ambitions were nothing short of global. His aim was not merely conquest but domination, to subdue the Greek world and incorporate it into his vast empire stretching from the Indus River to the Nile. Herodotus records the grandeur of the Persian army, claiming numbers so great that they could not be counted even by the most skilled scribes. A description that, though likely exaggerated, captures the psychological weight of the approaching force. It is said that Xerxes consulted the oracles and proclaimed, "The gods themselves cannot withstand my will." In Greece, fear was tempered by resolve. The city-states convened at the Isthmus of Corinth to deliberate on a unified strategy. Athens, still recovering from Persian incursions in 490 BCE during the Battle of Marathon, pledged naval support. Sparta, the land power par excellence, offered troops under King Leonidas. Yet internal disagreements persisted. Many Greek cities debated whether resistance was feasible against the Persian juggernaut, weighing survival against honor. Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, emerged as the strategic linchpin. This narrow pass, wedged between the cliffs of Mount Kallidromos and the Malian Gulf, served as the only viable corridor for a land-based advance into southern Greece. To the north lay Thessaly's fertile plains, while to the south the path led toward the cities of Boeotia and Phasis, and eventually to Athens itself. The Greeks understood that if they could hold this choke point, they might delay or even thwart the Persian advance. Herodotus writes, "For in that place, narrow as it is, the many will be of little avail against the few, and the mountain will fight with the defenders." The coalition at Thermopylae consisted of approximately 7,000 men, with 300 elite Spartans forming the spearhead. These warriors were not merely soldiers. They were the product of generations of rigorous training and cultural indoctrination in discipline, courage, and sacrifice. From childhood, Spartan boys endured the agoge, a system of education and physical conditioning designed to produce formidable fighters. Their loyalty to Sparta, and to each other, was absolute. Leonidas, a king trained in both leadership and combat, embodied the Spartan ideal. Other contingents brought diverse strengths. Athenians contributed hoplites skilled in both shield and spear, Thespians and Thebans added local knowledge of the terrain, and Boeotian allies reinforced the flank. While the Persians relied on sheer numbers, the Greeks would rely on cohesion, terrain, and morale. Leonidas is recorded to have told his men, "Come back with your shield or upon it," a stark reminder of the stakes and of the Spartan code. On the Persian side, Xerxes' army was a spectacle of imperial might. Archers, cavalry, and infantry stretched as far as the eye could see. Among them were the Immortals, an elite force of 10,000 soldiers whose reputation for invincibility was legendary. Banners fluttered above the formations, and the clatter of armor and the rhythmic beating of drums signaled both discipline and intimidation. Herodotus recounts that the Persian forces included contingents from across the empire. Medes, Indians, Egyptians, and Arabs, each bringing unique tactics and weapons, creating a multinational army of unprecedented scope. The geography of Thermopylae itself would prove decisive. The pass's narrowness meant that the Persians could not deploy their full numbers at once, forcing them into a constricted front where the Greeks' superior tactics could dominate. Behind the Greek lines lay villages such as Trachis and the Valley of Lamia, offering potential refuge and logistical support. Nearby hills provided observation points and defensive advantage, while hidden mountain paths known only to locals would later become pivotal in the unfolding drama. As the Greeks arrived at Thermopylae, the air was tense with anticipation. Families in nearby villages watched as columns of soldiers marched into the pass, banners snapping in the wind, bronze shields glinting under the sun. The Spartans drilled with relentless precision, forming unbreakable phalanxes, while Leonidas and his officers scouted the terrain and positioned archers and spearmen at strategic choke points. In the days leading to the battle, diplomacy continued alongside preparation. Envoys from Xerxes sought to intimidate the Greeks into surrender, offering gold and threats of annihilation. Leonidas responded with characteristic resolve, reportedly saying, "Malan Labe, come and take them," defying the Persian king and setting the stage for a confrontation that would resonate through history. Thus the stage was set. On one side, a coalition of Greek city-states, united by necessity but diverse in origin and experience, ready to defend their homeland. On the other, the Persian Empire, vast, disciplined, and driven by ambition, seeking to march unopposed into the heart of Greece. Between them lay Thermopylae, a narrow corridor of cliffs and sea where strategy, courage, and destiny would collide. As the Greeks gathered at Thermopylae, the Spartan contingent stood as both vanguard and symbol. Numbering only 300, they were vastly outnumbered by the approaching Persians, yet their reputation for discipline and courage carried weight far beyond their numbers. Spartan boys, raised under the rigorous agode system, had been trained from childhood to endure hunger, cold, and pain without complaint. By age 20, a Spartan was expected to be a fully armed and capable soldier, ready to fight in the phalanx or die defending his city. King Leonidas himself embodied the Spartan ideal. A seasoned warrior, he had fought in previous campaigns, understanding both the brutality of combat and the delicate strategy required to hold a narrow pass. According to Herodotus, he famously reminded his council that the Persian threat was immense, but that a small, disciplined force, using terrain intelligently, could hold it in check. Leonidas' leadership was not merely martial. It inspired loyalty and courage among allies from other Greek city-states who recognized the futility of standing alone. The Greek coalition was a patchwork of forces, reflecting the political realities of the era. Athenians contributed a contingent of hoplites, heavily armed with shields, spears, and bronze helmets. Though Athens' pride was naval power, these land forces brought experience and tactical skill honed during prior conflicts with the Persians. From Thespi came around 700 men, determined to defend their homeland and nearby territories, while Thebans and Boeotian allies occupied critical positions along the flanks. Plataeans, numbering in the hundreds, provided additional infantry, motivated by their recent history of Persian aggression. Each group brought its own fighting style and cultural ethos. The Spartans moved as a single, cohesive unit, relying on rigid phalanx formation where shields overlapped and spears projected outward in a deadly bristling wall. The Athenians, while disciplined, adapted more flexible maneuvers, capable of responding to changing conditions within the pass. Herodotus notes that despite differences in origin and training, the Greeks shared a unifying understanding. The survival of Greece depended on their ability to hold Thermopylae, even at the cost of their lives. The terrain dictated the Greeks' defensive strategy. Thermopylae, at its narrowest points, was little more than a few dozen meters wide, with cliffs rising sharply on the northern side and the Malian Gulf pressing against the southern edge. The Greeks deployed in depth. The Spartans anchored the central phalanx, with Athenians, Thespians, and other allies filling the flanks. Archers and light infantry occupied elevated positions along rocky outcrops, providing enfilading fire on any advancing Persian columns. Hidden paths through the mountains were scouted, not only to prevent surprise attacks, but to allow for potential tactical withdrawals if the line was breached. Individual acts of preparation and courage are recorded even before the battle began. Dinex, a Spartan noted for his dry wit and fearlessness, reportedly joked to his fellow soldiers that the Persian arrows were so numerous they would blot out the sun. "Good," he said, "then we shall fight in the shade." Such stories, whether fully accurate or embellished by oral tradition, reveal the character of the men who stood at Thermopylae, resolute, fearless, and committed to duty above self. Leonidas' personal guard, the 300 Spartans, was a microcosm of Spartan society. Each man had been tested repeatedly, from the agoge's endurance trials to city-wide martial competitions. Among them were men who had fathered sons, knowing that the future of Sparta was secure in their absence, and young warriors yet unmarried, whose courage was their sole legacy. Together, they formed the spine of the defense, their bronze shields interlocked and spears ready, a living wall against an enemy whose size dwarfed their own. Herodotus highlights the critical psychological element in this defensive arrangement. While the Spartans were physically formidable, their presence also bolstered the morale of allied troops who drew courage from their leaders' confidence. This unity was essential. While Greeks were accustomed to internal rivalry and city-state politics, the threat from Persia necessitated unprecedented cooperation. In moments of tension, Leonidas' presence riding along the line served as both tactical oversight and moral inspiration. The Greeks also considered logistics. Food and water were stockpiled in nearby villages such as Trachis, Lamia, and Kallidromos settlements. Supplies were limited, but careful rationing and the knowledge that the defensive engagement could be brief mitigated the risk of scarcity. The Greek commanders understood that their role was to delay, hold, and inflict maximum damage. Victory in the conventional sense was unlikely, yet survival of the broader Hellenic world risk. While the Greeks marshaled their defenses at Thermopylae, the Persian army advanced with awe-inspiring scale and precision. King Xerxes I, seated on his golden throne, observed the plains of Thessaly stretching toward the pass. Herodotus describes the army as so vast that the ground could scarcely support their numbers, a depiction intended to convey the psychological weight of Persia's power, if not literal arithmetic. Modern historians suggest that the army may have numbered in the hundreds of thousands, a formidable force that dwarfed the Greek defenders. The Persian army was a diverse coalition, drawing troops from across the empire. Medes and Persians formed the core, heavily armed in bronze or scale armor and wielding spears and swords. Cavalry units, particularly from the Iranian plateau, provided mobility and shock power, while archers from Syria, Anatolia, and Egypt could rain thousands of arrows upon advancing opponents. Notably, the Immortals, a legendary 10,000-strong unit, served as elite infantry, their name derived from the strict replacement policy that kept their numbers constant, reinforcing their aura of invincibility. Herodotus notes that the Immortals never fled, and to see them arrayed in battle was to witness the heart of the Persian army itself. Xerxes' approach to war combined strategy, intimidation, and spectacle. Soldiers marched with banners fluttering, drums beating, and horns sounding, their combined effect designed to unnerve the Greeks before contact. Engineers prepared mobile bridges and siege equipment, while supply caravans trailed the army for weeks, ensuring food, water, and weapons for the advancing host. Every detail underscored the king's ambition. Thermopylae was not merely a tactical engagement, but a statement of imperial dominance. The terrain, however, would challenge even Persia's overwhelming numbers. The narrow pass of Thermopylae forced the advancing army into compressed formations. Unlike the open plains of Anatolia or Mesopotamia, where cavalry and archers could maneuver freely, the confined space limited deployment and neutralized numerical advantage. Xerxes was acutely aware of this. Scouts reported the Greeks' strong position, their shields interlocked and spears projecting outward, forming an almost impenetrable wall. Herodotus recounts that Xerxes attempted psychological pressure as well. Envoys were sent to demand the Greeks' surrender, offering gold and threatening annihilation. His message was clear: resistance was futile. Yet Leonidas' reply Malian Gulf resonated far beyond the pass, a succinct statement of defiance that emboldened the Greeks and stoked the Persian king's impatience. In response, Xerxes prepared to demonstrate both the discipline and firepower of his army, intending to break the Greek line by sheer force. The Immortals, forming the spearhead, were trained to exploit weaknesses in enemy lines. Clad in bronze cuirasses with long spears and short swords, they advanced in unison, their cohesion reinforced by years of rigorous drilling. Supporting them were archers and slingers, positioned to harass the Greek flanks, while cavalry units remained poised to exploit any breach. Persian engineers constructed temporary bridges and cleared pathways along the edges of the Malian Gulf, seeking to flank the Greek position and threaten the high ground. Despite this preparation, morale was not uniform. Many troops drawn from distant lands lacked familiarity with Greek terrain and warfare. Communication between units of different language and culture required careful coordination. Yet the psychological impact of Xerxes' presence, commanding from his elevated throne and demonstrating both wealth and authority, served to unify the army and maintain discipline. Herodotus remarks, The Persians, though many, were moved as one by the sight and voice of their king, for his majesty inspired both awe and obedience. The sheer diversity of the army introduced logistical challenges. Horses and camels required grazing, and water had to be drawn from rivers and wells along the route. Infantry needed food for sustained march and battle. Persian administrators and quartermasters coordinated an intricate supply chain, ensuring that the army remained operational over hundreds of kilometers of Greek territory. Even so, the narrowness of the pass would test the limits of coordination. Thousands of soldiers would be funneled into a few dozen meters, reducing the effectiveness of numbers and exposing units to concentrated defensive fire. Xerxes' strategy relied on relentless pressure. Waves of Persian troops would attack the Greek phalanx, seeking to break it by weight and persistence. Archers would saturate the narrow corridor with volleys, attempting to penetrate shield walls. Cavalry and immortals were positioned to exploit any sign of weakness. Yet the Persian command recognized the risks. Should the Greeks hold too long, attrition and terrain would fav. Xerxes' strategy relied on relentless pressure. Waves of Persian troops would attack the Greek phalanx, seeking to break it by weight and persistence. Archers would saturate the narrow corridor with volleys, attempting to penetrate shield walls. Cavalry and immortals were positioned to exploit any sign of weakness. Yet the Persian command recognized the risks. Should the Greeks hold too long, attrition and terrain would favor the defenders, requiring adaptation. Herodotus provides vivid anecdotes illustrating Persian discipline and arrogance. He recounts that Xerxes' army was so vast that engineers built pontoon bridges across the Hellespont to transport troops and supplies from Asia Minor to Thrace, and that Xerxes ordered sections of the sea whipped and chained to punish Poseidon, the god of waters, for breaking earlier bridges. These stories, while anecdotal, emphasize the combination of scale, ambition, and ritual that characterized the Persian campaign. As the Persian army approached Thermopylae, the tension became palpable. Columns of soldiers extended as far as the eye could see, banners fluttering above infantry, horses snorting and pawing at the ground, and the immortals marching in perfect unison. From elevated hills, Greek scouts observed the endless tide of men, assessing both the challenge and the opportunities presented by the confined pass. Xerxes, confident yet impatient, anticipated that the first assault would quickly break the Greek line and open the road to central Greece. Yet beneath the grandeur, Persian commanders were aware of the difficulties posed by the narrow terrain. History would later record that the pass would neutralize much of Persia's numerical superiority, forcing them into frontal assaults against disciplined phalanxes. Even the vast resources of the empire could not guarantee immediate victory. The coming clash would test strategy, courage, and endurance to their limits, marking Thermopylae as a decisive point in the struggle between East and West. Thus, the Persians, immense in number, varied in origin, and meticulously organized, prepared to confront a small but determined Greek coalition. The stage was set. On one side, a disciplined and courageous defense, on the other, an empire of staggering scale intent on crushing resistance and asserting dominance. Between them lay the narrow pass of Thermopylae, where geography would amplify the courage of the few and challenge the might of the many. At dawn on the first day of battle, the stillness around Thermopylae was broken by the sound of war drums echoing across the Malian Gulf. Mist hung low between the cliffs of Mount Kallidromos and the sea, shrouding both armies in an eerie calm before the storm. The Greeks stood silent, their bronze shields reflecting the faint glow of the rising sun, their spears pointed forward, awaiting the first Persian advance. From his elevated vantage point, Xerxes observed the narrow corridor ahead. The pass seemed insignificant, a thin line of earth between mountain and water, yet he knew it was the key to Greece. Confident in his overwhelming numbers, he ordered his Medes, renowned for their courage, to attack and break the Greek line quickly. The Medes advanced with disciplined steps, their armor glittering, the sound of sandals and shields merging into a rhythmic thunder. As they approached the Greek position, they loosed volleys of arrows into the air, darkening the sky. But the Spartans raised their shields in unison, the bronze deflecting the deadly rain. The arrows clattered harmlessly against the interlocked wall. Then the Medes charged. The narrow terrain forced them into a tight column, their long spears met the unyielding wall of the Greek phalanx. The Spartans, anchored in formation, moved as one, each warrior's shield overlapped with his neighbor's, creating an unbroken barrier. As the Persians struck, they were met not by chaos but by rhythm, each Spartan thrusting and withdrawing in perfect timing. The Medes fell in waves, their numbers counted in the hundreds before they could even reach the Greek front. Herodotus writes that Xerxes, watching from his throne, rose 3 times in disbelief as his men were cut down. The Greeks, though vastly outnumbered, held the pass with mathematical precision, fighting in shifts, retreating and advancing in ordered rotation. By mid-morning, the ground before them was slick with blood and scattered with broken weapons. The Persian second wave followed, the elite immortals, hand-picked for skill and loyalty. They advanced under the command of Hydarnes, confident that their superior armor and experience would overwhelm the defenders. Their scale armor gleamed under the sun and their ranks moved with mechanical grace. Xerxes expected swift victory. But the immortals found themselves constrained by the terrain. Their numbers meant nothing in the narrow pass where only a few men could engage at once. The Spartans adjusted their formation, feigning retreat to draw the Persians in before wheeling back in counterattack. Spears pierced through armor gaps, shields rammed into faces and chests. At times, the Greeks fought knee-deep in corpses, the air thick with dust and the stench of sweat and iron. When Persian spears broke against the Greek shields, soldiers switched to swords, but the Spartans' shorter Xiphos blades proved superior in close quarters. Greek discipline, born of years of relentless training, outmatched Persian numbers and agility. Even when the immortals pressed from the rear, their comrades ahead found no room to maneuver or withdraw. By sunset, the pass was littered with Persian dead. The Greeks withdrew slightly to rest and recover their wounded, while the Persians retreated in exhaustion and disbelief. Xerxes' fury was tempered only by the necessity of regrouping. Herodotus notes that Xerxes expected the Greeks to flee under cover of darkness. Yet when dawn came on the second day, the Spartan line remained silent, unbroken, defiant. The second day's assault began with renewed determination. Xerxes, unwilling to concede, ordered fresh troops from Bactria and Scythia to attack. Again, the narrow pass neutralized their numbers. The Greeks rotated their front lines with methodical efficiency, allowing fresh men to replace the weary. From the cliffs above, archers from Phocis launched volleys into Persian ranks, adding to the chaos. The Persians tried to adapt, sending light infantry to climb the slopes of Kallidromos in an attempt to flank the defenders. Greek scouts, however, anticipated this move and countered with ambushes, rolling stones and hurling javelins down upon the climbers. The mountain itself became a weapon. Throughout the day, Xerxes watched as the battle repeated its grim rhythm. Persian attacks surged and broke again. The Greeks' formation, though thinning, held firm. By evening, Persian morale began to waver. Among the fallen lay commanders and immortals alike. It was then that treachery shifted the course of the war. Herodotus recounts that a local Greek named Ephialtes of Trachis, seeking favor and reward, approached Xerxes' camp under cover of night. He revealed the existence of a hidden path through the mountains, a goat track winding behind the Greek position. This secret route, long known to locals and used by shepherds, could allow the Persians to outflank the defenders. Xerxes, seizing the opportunity, ordered Hydarnes and a detachment of the immortals to take the path under darkness. At dawn on the third day, Greek scouts stationed on the heights saw movement among the trees, shadows where none should have been. Panic rippled through the defenders as word spread. The Persians had found a way around. Leonidas, realizing the inevitability of encirclement, convened his officers. He dismissed most of the allied troops, ordering them to retreat and fight another day. But he and his 300 Spartans, along with 700 Thespians and a handful of Thebans, chose to remain. Leonidas' decision was not one of despair but of resolve. "We shall stand and fight," he is said to have told his men, "for we are enough to defend the memory of Greece." The Thespians refused to leave, choosing death beside the Spartans over survival through retreat, a gesture of loyalty and courage that Herodotus would later immortalize. The final stand began as the sun rose over the Gulf. The Greeks advanced from their fortifications, pushing deeper into the pass to fight in open ground. Knowing death was certain, they sought to inflict as much damage as possible. Spears shattered, men fought with swords, daggers, and even bare hands. Leonidas himself was struck down, pierced by arrows, his body fiercely defended by his comrades. Herodotus writes that the Greeks and Persians fought over the body of Leonidas more fiercely than over any other thing in the war. As the immortals closed in from behind, the Greeks were surrounded. Yet even in encirclement, they refused to yield. Driven back to the narrowest section of the pass near the hillock later known as Kolonos, the last defenders made their final stand. There, amid heaps of Persian dead, they fought until their weapons broke, until shields splintered and armor was torn away. The last Spartans stood shoulder to shoulder, hurling stones and fists at their enemies, defiant to the end. When the fighting finally ceased, the Persian victory came at a staggering cost. Thousands of their soldiers lay dead upon the narrow ground, the air thick with the smell of death and salt. Xerxes, enraged but also impressed, ordered the body of Leonidas decapitated and displayed, an act meant to intimidate but remembered by history as a symbol of his fear and frustration. Herodotus writes that after the battle, Xerxes commanded his engineers to clear the pass of corpses, so his troops could advance southward unimpeded. Yet even as the Persians marched on, the legend of Thermopylae began to spread across Greece. Messengers reached Corinth and Athens, carrying tales of valor that defied comprehension. How a few thousand men had held off the might of an empire for 3 days. How 300 Spartans and their allies had fought to the last breath for freedom. The site of Thermopylae became sacred ground. Later, travelers would see the mound where the Spartans fell and the inscription carved into stone by the poet Simonides. "Go tell the Spartans, passerby, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." In that simple epitaph lay the essence of the Greek defense: obedience to duty, devotion to freedom, and defiance against tyranny. The Persian army had won the pass, but the Greeks had claimed immortality. When the smoke cleared and the cries of battle faded into silence, the narrow pass of Thermopylae lay carpeted with bodies, Greek and Persian alike. The ground, once dry and stony, was soaked with blood. The Malian Gulf shimmered beside it, eerily calm, as though indifferent to the thousands of souls claimed in the name of empire and freedom. The Persians, victorious but battered, surveyed the cost. Xerxes walked the battlefield, surrounded by his royal guard. The carnage was immense. The king who had expected an easy conquest now saw the price of his ambition measured in the corpses of his finest men. He ordered the pass cleared and his dead buried. Leonidas' body was mutilated, his head placed upon a spear as a warning to all who dared oppose Persia. Yet the act, intended to display power, instead exposed fear. For in the eyes of his soldiers and the stories that would soon spread across the Aegean, Leonidas was not defeated, he was immortalized. The Persian army advanced south, moving through the scorched land of Phasis and into Boeotia. Villages were razed, temples looted. The smoke of burning towns rose above the landscape. By late summer, Xerxes' forces reached Athens, which had been evacuated under Themistocles' orders. Only a few defenders remained on the Acropolis, holding the sacred citadel as long as they could. The Persians burned it to the ground, their flames consuming centuries of Greek devotion. Yet even as Athens fell, the Greek alliance did not break. The sacrifice at Thermopylae had bought them precious time to regroup, to plan, and to unite. The Athenian fleet stationed at Salamis under Themistocles' cunning leadership waited in the straits, preparing for the next great confrontation. Meanwhile, the legend of Thermopylae spread across Greece like wildfire. In Corinth, Plataea, and Argos, poets and soldiers alike spoke of the 300 Spartans and the Thespians who had chosen death over surrender. Stories of Leonidas' final stand stirred not despair but courage. Thermopylae became more than a defeat, it became a symbol of resistance. Herodotus, writing decades later, described how the Greek morale transformed after the battle. They had learned that freedom, though bought with blood, was worth the price. The Persians might occupy their land, but they could never conquer their spirit. Across the Aegean, cities that had once wavered now joined the cause. Even the proud, often divided polis began to see themselves not as isolated rivals, but as parts of a greater whole, Hellas united against tyranny. Themistocles, understanding that unity was Greece's greatest weapon, sent deceptive messages to Xerxes, luring the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, in a clash that mirrored the narrow pass of Thermopylae, Greek strategy triumphed once more. The smaller, faster triremes of Athens rammed the massive Persian ships, breaking their formation and crushing their morale. As Xerxes watched from his throne atop Mount Kallidromos, his mighty navy burned before his eyes. The sea that had carried his armies now carried his defeat. His dreams of subjugating Greece began to unravel. Thermopylae, though a military loss, had become the turning point of the entire campaign. The sacrifice of a few thousand men had delayed and demoralized a force many times their size, allowing Greece to strike decisively at Salamis and later at Plataea. When the final victories came a year later at Plataea and Mycale, it was with the cry of "Remember Thermopylae" that the Greeks charged into battle. The name itself had become a rallying call, a symbol of defiance echoing across generations. In the years that followed, the battlefield became a sacred site. Travelers and soldiers would climb the small mound near Kolonos, where the last defenders made their stand. There, the poet Simonides of Chios erected a simple stone monument with an epitaph that still resonates through the ages. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." This inscription was not merely a commemoration, it was a declaration of Greek identity. To die obeying one's laws, to uphold honor and duty even in the face of certain death, was the essence of Arete, the Greek ideal of excellence. For centuries, the name Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, became synonymous with courage against impossible odds. In later generations, it was invoked by Romans, by medieval knights, and even by modern nations as a symbol of selfless defense of freedom. In Sparta, the fallen were revered not as martyrs but as victors. Their families wore no mourning clothes, their sons were raised in pride. A bronze lion was later erected at the site, its silent gaze turned toward the east, the direction from which Xerxes had come. Even centuries later, travelers described standing at the pass with reverence. The landscape changed, the shoreline receded, the mountains eroded, but the legend endured. Thermopylae became a word T. This inscription was not merely a commemoration, it was a declaration of Greek identity. To die obeying one's laws, to uphold honor and duty even in the face of certain death, was the essence of Arete, the Greek ideal of excellence. For centuries, the name Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, became synonymous with courage against impossible odds. In later generations, it was invoked by Romans, by medieval knights, and even by modern nations as a symbol of selfless defense of freedom. In Sparta, the fallen were revered not as martyrs but as victors. Their families wore no mourning clothes, their sons were raised in pride. A bronze lion was later erected at the site, its silent gaze turned toward the east, the direction from which Xerxes had come. Even centuries later, travelers described standing at the pass with reverence. The landscape changed, the shoreline receded, the mountains eroded, but the legend endured. Thermopylae became a word that transcended geography, a place of the spirit as much as the earth. The Persian Empire would recover and continue to rule vast territories for centuries, but Greece, united in its brief but fierce resistance, had lit the flame of an idea that would outlast empires. That freedom is worth dying for, and that even in defeat, honor can achieve victory. Modern historians like the ancient Herodotus before them still debate numbers and tactics. Was the Persian army truly in the millions? Did exactly 300 Spartans fight alone at the end? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between record and legend. But what cannot be debated is the resonance of Thermopylae's story, the power of a few standing firm against the many. From the cliffs of Mount Kallidromos to the waves of the Malian Gulf, the wind still whispers their names. Leonidas, Xerxes, Herodotus, the Thespians who chose to stay, the nameless soldiers who stood shoulder to shoulder and met death with steady eyes. Thermopylae endures not because it was a battle lost, but because it was a victory of the human spirit. A testament to unity, discipline, and courage. A reminder that empires rise and fall, but the ideals of honor and freedom endure beyond time. And so, even today, when people speak of standing against impossible odds, they evoke Thermopylae, the narrow pass where a few defied an empire, and in doing so, changed the course of history forever.